In the mansion called literature, I would have the eaves deep and the walls dark. I would push back into the shadows the things that come forward too clearly. I would strip away the useless decoration. I do not ask that this be done everywhere, but perhaps we may be allowed at least one mansion where we can turn off the electric lights and see what it is like without them. That was a passage from Tanizaki Junichiro's In Praise of Shadows. And it might sound a little strange, but its meaning actually explains why that is the case. Tanizaki was basically saying that he appreciates when a piece of literature can have the meaning hidden, even if everyone does not write this way. Tanizaki Junichiro was an interesting man. You could say he was even a bit of a rebel. In pages 78 through 79 of Volume F of the Norton Anthology of World Literature, it explained that Tanizaki was born and raised in Japan in the late 19th century. He grew up in the middle class with his struggling parents, who were only able to really get through the hard times thanks to his successful grandfather. His interests growing up strongly influenced his writing style and topics as an adult. He enjoyed some of the more traditional forms of entertainment with his parents, like attending plays at the Kabuki Theater and tea houses, or sightseeing in a rickshaw with his mother, which a rickshaw being a two-wheeled passenger cart pulled by someone, and even attending geisha houses with his father, geisha houses were traditional hostess houses. Tanizaki's style was also shaped by his fascination with fictional books that he was able to get from libraries and bookstores, and he would watch nightly local plays that usually involved, quote, violence and manipulation, end quote. As stated by Professor William Atkinson from Appalachian State University in his journal, Wrapping the Hole in the Middle of It All, there were a variety of feelings towards Tanizaki's writings, ranging from very high regards to the value of his work to complete dismissal of the literary merit due to the controversial content. The negative opinions of his work were mostly related to how they involved sexual obsessions and sadomasochism, which involves taking sexual pleasure in the pain of others. And according to a thesis called Tanizaki Junichiro and the Art of Storytelling from a graduate student, Tin Pham, at the University of Quebec, Tanizaki was also criticized for his work lacking intellectual content. This was a claim based on the fact that Tanizaki refused to write in the modern style of narrative, which was realism, based on realism being a writing that's based on the author's experiences and what they know in their culture. And it is said, though, that Tanizaki didn't want to write in this style of realism, even as common as it was, because he wanted his fantasy to get to the readers to feel something, and he wanted to let them interpret what they took out of it. Based on a book on Japanese text, subtitled 7 Japanese Titles by Tanizaki Junichiro by Ken Ito, in Tanizaki's time, the West was becoming a lot more influential in Japan, and he was what was called a Westernizer, or someone who supported the integration of Western culture. This shows in some of his writings, such as one called Aguri, published in 1922, in which a man dedicates himself to making his mistress into a fully westernized woman, and another story called Naomi from 1925, where a man tries to turn a barmaid into the spitting image of a famous Western actress from the West at the time. The Norton Anthology of World Literature textbook points out that eventually Tanizaki does come back around to appreciating his own native Japanese culture, along with what he has learned from the Western culture, and even criticizes the infatuation of people towards the West. His collection of works can make up about 28 volumes, and the initial quote I stated was part of one of Tanizaki's most quoted and popular creations, In Praise of Shadows. The piece I will be reading from, The Tattooer, is from 1910, one of Tanizaki's earlier stories, meaning that This story was of the more erotic nature that's characteristic of when he was starting out his writing career. So after kind of getting to know Tanizaki, I had the pleasure of confusingly trying to interpret his piece, The Tattooer. With one read over, the story seems pretty bizarre due to the erotic temperament, and continued to be after the second and even third read through. But I will read a portion of the text that I feel that helps to establish the theme that I was able to take while analyzing the story. For a long time, Saikichi had cherished the desire to create a masterpiece on the skin of a beautiful woman. Such a woman had to meet various qualifications of character as well as appearance. A lovely face and a fine body were not enough to satisfy him. Though he inspected all the reigning beauties of the Edo gay quarters, he found none who met his exacting demands. Several years had passed without success, and yet the face and figure of the perfect woman continued to obsess his thoughts. He refused to abandon hope. One summer evening, during the 4th year of his search, Saikichi happened to be passing the Hirase restaurant in the Fukugawa district of Edo, not far from his own house, when he noticed a woman's bare milk-white foot peeping through beneath the curtains of a departing palanquin. To his sharp eye, a human foot was as expressive as a face. This one was sheer perfection, exquisitely chiseled toes, nails like the iridescent shells along the shore of Enoshima, a pearl-like rounded heel, skin so lustrous that it seemed bathed in the limpid waters of a mountain spring. This, indeed, was a foot to be nourished by men's blood, a foot to trample on their bodies. Surely this foot was of the unique woman who had so long eluded him. Eager to catch a glimpse of her face, Saikichi began to follow the palanquin. But after pursuing it down several lanes and alleys, he lost sight of it altogether. Saikichi's long-held desire turned into a passionate love. In Ken Ito's guide to Japanese texts covering Tanizaki's work, he points out that there seems to be a repetitive nature to Tanizaki's work that includes paradoxes of power. In the case of the tattooer, for most of the story, the power seems to be in the hands of the tattooer, Saikichi. But more honestly, he's the one that's at the mercy of whom he thinks he's made, even before he meets or makes her. This slavery to his desire could be attributed to his artistic nature combined with a secret pleasure of masochism through the process of creating tapestry on people's skin. Saikichi's slavery to his passion shows in the passage, quote, "For a long time, Saikichi had cherished the desire to create a masterpiece on the skin of a beautiful woman." End quote. He had a particular list of qualifications that he was looking for, making it a difficult task, but not deterring him from his longing to find her. As it says that, quote, "several years had passed without success, and yet the face and figure of the perfect woman continued to obsess his thoughts," end quote. And then, after just seeing a woman's foot, which he says, quote, "surely was the foot of the unique woman who had so long eluded him," end quote, he falls into a so-called passionate love for this woman and searches for the owner for yet another 5 years. So then, the power was never really something that Saikichi controlled. He was under the influence of his art and his goal for the perfect masterpiece. When he does eventually find the woman, he shows her 2 paintings, both of women in positions of power over men either being tortured or already dead. These paintings supposedly help the woman discover her true self, having the same masochistic satisfaction as Saikichi. This similarity seems to make Saikichi quite happy and encourages him to drug the woman so that he can finally tattoo her and, quote, "make her a real beauty," end quote. The power of the art over the artist is most apparent after he finishes the tattoo on the woman, when she finds that her old fears are no more, and she claims him as her, quote, first victim. Without diving into the different dimensions of symbolism from the story, the passage brings attention to the paradox of power, which is supported by how the control is assumed to be in the hands of the tattooer, Sakichi, but instead the artist is puppet to his own passion. Thank you for listening to my interpretation of the tattooer and the biography of Tanizaki Junichiro, and I hope you have a great one.